Hello, welcome back to Self-Host Sundays, and today is a big one. We are going to be looking at setting up a automated media server. So we're going to be using Usenet. I'll take you through Docker. We'll be covering Radarr, Sonarr, SABnzbd, Plex, and a little bit of Jellyfin at the end for those people who prefer that. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we'll be building today. So this is all my own media, which is currently streaming on my smart TV. There is also an app which my girlfriend can use on her phone, and look, there's my dog. So if you haven't seen my previous video, where I go into depth about what we'll be covering and the type of equipment I'll be using, then please do be sure to go back and check that out. There are some things that you will need. Just before we dive right in, I just want to reiterate that I am using my NAS, which is a Ugreen DXP 6800 Pro. So if you're using a Ugreen NAS, you can follow these steps exactly as I do. If you're using another device, for example, a Synology, or if you're just using your Windows PC or a Mac, a Linux, whatever your chosen device is, there will be some key differences. However, you should be able to figure out those differences as we go ahead. The main point being, if you are using any of those devices, you'll just need to go to docker.com and then make sure that you install Docker Desktop for whichever device you are using. So in the case of a Ugreen NAS, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to find.ugnas.com. What that's going to do is it's going to scan our local network and find the device which is plugged into my router downstairs. So you can see here, here's my device, the DXP 6800 Pro. It's not been initialized yet. There's the model, and one thing to take note of here is this IP address. This will become very important because all our apps are going to run on our device, so we need to access this IP address. So the same goes for your Windows PC, your MacBook, your laptop, whatever it might be. We'll need to find out what the IP address of that is. So this is just a local IP address, so it will always start 192.168, and then it'll be either .1 or .0, and then these last two digits will be the device's address. So if you're not sure how to find this information out, the easiest way to do it on a Windows PC is if you go to your settings, you come down to your network and internet, and if you click where it says properties, and you scroll down, you're looking for your IPv4 address here. So we can see that the PC I'm currently recording on ends in .50. Obviously, that's not where I'm going to be running my server, but if you are running it on a PC, then that is how you'd find the address of the device. So now we're going to connect. So it's just going to make me do some basic setups. So I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to set up my username and all things like that, and then I'll see you shortly. And here we are on our Ugreen NAS. So you can see at the top my IP address there, the device address, and then my port is just 9999, which is the default Ugreen one. So if you've gone through the wizard, this will redirect you to this screen automatically. And I think you'll probably get some introductory little pop-ups and things like that, so you can just skip through them. So the first thing we need to do is set up our storage pools. So basically, if you've added a load of hard drives to your device or SSDs, we basically need to initialize them. So in order to do that, we're going to go to our storage icon. You'll get some little pop-ups. We can ignore those. We can just hit create. This will take us to the storage creation pool. Now, you can see here that I currently have 5 hard drives and 2 SSDs. Now, if you saw my previous video, the reason I advise having both hard drives and SSDs is because the way we're going to set this up is we're going to install our apps and do our downloads to the SSD. The hard drives are going to be for like our main storage. So when we download a movie or a TV show, it's going to download to the SSD. It's going to be renamed and processed, whatever it might be. And then once it's done, it's going to move over to a hard drive. And then Plex is going to scan those hard drives, or Jellyfin's going to scan those hard drives. And that's where it's going to find our media. If you were to download directly to the hard drives, it's incredibly slow, and also it's a little bit messy, and if you're running a NAS, you will hear the drives read and write sounds. It sounds like a laser burning a disk, because that's essentially what it is. So your spouse will complain, as I can attest to. So first things first, I'm going to create our SSD storage pool. So I'm just going to select both of these drives. Now, you might have heard the term RAID and things like that. Now, very, very briefly, because it can be quite complicated, and it does sum them up quite nicely here, is for different RAID types, it's basically about data protection. If a drive fails, how secure do you want the backup, basically? There is loads of really complicated stuff I could go into. Personally, for me, as this is just going to be running as a media server, and everything I store on here is not anything important, basically. So if I can afford to lose it, it can go on the NAS. Anything else that's more important, I have backed up across multiple different cloud services and personal devices. So this is just a media server. So if I lose a movie, I can just download it again. So the one I advise using for this case is JBOD, which is, I think it's just a bunch of drives, I believe it's technically referred to as. And the reason we do that is because it gets us the most capacity, and it's a very, very quick setup. So there's probably people who are more experienced with those screaming at their monitors or their phones right now. But in terms of this, then I'd advise just using that one. You can see there that on RAID 0 and JBOD, we get 1.7 terabytes of the 1.8 I've got available. Whereas if you look at RAID 1, it will use one drive, and it will also use a separate drive for recovery. So we end up losing basically half of our available data. So I'm just going to click JBOD. And you can see there you get this nice little kind of color graphic. Whereas if I were to click RAID 1, you could see that where the data protection kicks in. So this is quite a nice way to illustrate it, because like I said, it can be quite complex. And obviously the higher RAID number you go, obviously I can't get that far because I don't have that many drives, but the higher the number, the more secure your data is, in a nutshell. Like I said, it's way more complicated than that, but I won't cover all that here. So I'm just going to use JBOD. So we'll click Next. So I'm just going to leave it on Ext4. Yep, all the allocated total storage is available. I'll hit Next, and then I'll hit Create. So it's got to format the drives to make sure they're the right format, and then it's going to create the pool. So it'll ask you to confirm the password. So I'm just going to let it do that. So it shouldn't take too long. And there we are. So there is my first volume. So you can rename this if you like. I'm just going to leave it as storage pool 1. It doesn't really mean too much. So that's also going to start optimizing it in the background. So whilst that's doing that, we're going to create our second storage pool, which will be our hard drives. So I'm going to come up to Create, Storage Pool, and then for my remaining hard drives, I'm just going to select them all. And you can see here as well, just to illustrate, so if I was to go and use RAID 1, I'd only be able to use 3.6 terabyte of my 32 terabytes worth of drives, which obviously not much bang for your buck there, is it? And then if you look at things like RAID 5, I get 14 terabytes. If I get RAID 6, I get 10 terabytes. But like I said, for me, the only things that run on this server I can afford to lose. So I'm just going to stick to JBOD. And we'll do the exact same thing again. And we'll just click through, make sure the drives are formatted, enter your password, and let that create. Okay, there we are. That took a couple of minutes. Obviously, I think it all depends on the size of the drives, the amount of drives you have. The model I use, the 6800 Pro, has 6 drive bays for hard drives and 2 for M.2 drives. So now that's done, we're going to need to set up some folders. So now we're going to need to set up what's called shared folders. So the way I like to split these is we're going to create a shared folder. And then firstly, I'm going to set up my Docker folder. So this will be where all my Docker apps live and their respective configuration files and libraries and whatever app files they need to store. So I'm going to create Docker. I do believe they have to always be lowercase So storage location, I'm going to keep these obviously on volume 1. And then I don't need to set a usage limit because it can have as much as it wants of that drive. I'm not going to enable the recycle bin. And then I'm not going to hide subfolders and files from users who do not have permissions. So again, a lot of people probably screaming at the top of their lungs at their phones, but I only have one user on here, and when I access this remotely, it's behind several layers of security. So, and again, there's nothing important on here. So if someone wants to log in and help themselves to some old British sitcoms from the 80s, then they are more than welcome. So for the folder permissions, I'm obviously going to give myself read and write, and then we'll confirm that. And there is our Docker folder. Next up, we're going to create another folder, also on volume 1, and I'm going to call this one downloads. Now, you don't have to do this, but I prefer to keep my downloads in their own little shared folder, just because it makes it easier, as what can happen is we might come across it later, or we shouldn't do because I've set it up this way, is when you use, we're going to be using an app called SABnzbd to download our files. The apps that handle them need to be able to see that folder. And by default, SAB tends to keep its download folder within itself, and it can get quite messy. So more on that later, but we're just going to, I like keeping it separate. And then finally, we're going to create another folder, and this is going to be our main media folder. So I'm just going to create it on volume 2. I'm going to call this one media. So this is basically going to be everything else. And I'll just do the same. There we are. So now we've set up those folders, we need to install Docker. So the way to install Docker on a Ugreen NAS is if you come over here to this App Center. Yep, of course, I agree. We should be able to find it somewhere on here. There it is. So we're just going to click install. Yep, volume 1. I'm going to tick always install apps on this volume. I don't tend to use any of the App Center outside of Docker. Even for things like Jellyfin, I prefer to create an image and basically get the latest version, because these are not as up to date as the main ones that are on the Docker images portal. There we go. So now that's installed, I'm just going to open up Docker. And this is Docker. Now, if you've skipped to this section and you're on a Windows PC or a NAS, or you're using the normal Docker desktop, your UI will probably look a little bit different, but in theory, everything will work the same. And that's why we use Docker, because even though some of you will be using different machines with all different types of internals and processors and all that good stuff, Docker creates a level playing field, meaning that if it will work on Docker on one machine, it will work on Docker on a totally separate machine, totally different build. So it just makes it easier to manage. So just to give you a little bit of a guide around Docker, so we have down here 3 main things we're going to be covering are images, containers, and projects. Now, what are they? So they basically work from the bottom up. So an image is kind of like the app itself. It's like a recipe. The container is the cooking of the recipe, if we're going to continue with this tortured analogy. And a project is a oven full of cooked apps. I apologize for butchering that analogy. So images will download the app, containers will run the app, project is just a way to keep containers unified. So you might have heard the term stack. This is what a stack is. So for example, for our project, we're going to create a single project called media server or media stack, and then within that there will be containers for the apps we're going to use. So Radarr, Sonarr, Plex, Jellyfin, SAB, and then as the series goes on, we'll be adding more and more to our media server stack. And then the images are just the apps. Now you can download the images from here. There's all sorts of apps on here, so feel free to have a nosy if you're brand new to self-hosting. A lot of these, I couldn't tell you what most of them do. However, I prefer to build things directly in projects. So we're going to go to project. We're going to create a new project. Now, here's where it gets a bit technical and where a lot of people start getting scared of Docker. So currently, we have this blank canvas. So first, I want to give it a name. I'm going to call it media-server. It does have to be all one word. So if you're using multiple words, make sure you use a hyphen. And again, I believe it does also have to be all lowercase. Although I think it does automatically convert it if you do happen to use capitals, but don't quote me on that. Now, for storage path, I'm going to click this, and there's our Docker folder. So these are the shared folders we made before. So I'm going to select Docker. Obviously, there's nothing in there now. I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call this folder Media Project, or Media Server. I don't know why I called it Media Project. Consistency is key. And then we'll confirm that. So what is this here? This is our compose configuration. So what this is basically a list of instructions. So I will grab an example. So this is just the example I've grabbed. So I'll just talk you through how a YAML file works. So we have services at the top. That basically just tells it, here's the list of services. And then we have the name of our service, in this case, Plex. We have our image. So this is the link where it's going to download the image from. And part of that, we have tags. So you can see lscr.io/Linux server, which is quite a common image repository for Docker, /Plex. And then after this colon, it's got the latest tag. So that basically means that go to this link, grab Plex, but make sure you get the latest version. Some of them you might have tags that say things like dev or development or beta, or some of them have specific IDs. So for the most part, we'll just be using the latest. The container name, so it will create the container and give it the name of Plex. So when we view it in the container menu later, it will just be called Plex. Obviously, you can call it whatever you want, but I advise just call it whatever the name of the app is called, just for simplicity's sake. Network mode, there's a few different network modes. For Plex, we'll be leaving it on host, but usually you don't always have to declare a network mode, but for some apps you do. So basically this means that it's easier to find on the network. So obviously it's more advanced than that, but for the sake of this tutorial, don't worry too much about this. So these next two are the ones that you really want to pay attention to. So we have our environment, which is our environment variables, and we have our volumes, which is our drives and our folders. So what are environment variables? So this is what trips a lot of people up in Docker. Now, basically, these are kind of like configuration options that when the container starts, it's going to look through all these, it will compare them with what the app is asking for, and then it will input any values that you've added here. So just as an example, here is the Radarr environment variables. So you can see here, we've got things like theme. So if you were setting up Radarr, you could declare the theme directly within the environment variable. Don't worry too much about any of this for now. It's more just an FYI. So as you become more confident with Docker and setting up projects and containers, you understand what is meant by environment variables. Some of them will have mandatory ones. A lot of them will already have defaults in the app itself, so you don't need to worry too much. So the variables we have here are our PUID, which is our user ID, and our PGID, which is the group ID. So this is for permissions. So obviously I'm logged in as me, I'm logged in as Alex. So what it's going to do is when the app boots, it's going to go, okay, which user is logged in? And that user has an ID. The default is usually 1,000. I will show you how you find those IDs shortly. And then provided that that's all good, it will let me read and write the files. Obviously, if I had this incorrect, when Plex tried to download some artwork, for example, it would get an access denied error and say, whoa, 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 we don't know who PUID 99999 is, or whatever the ID is, if the ID was wrong. And then we have time zone. So in my case, it's London, which as a northerner upsets me. Now volumes. So you can see here, there's already some volumes here, which I set up earlier. I'll explain how they work. So basically in Docker, apps do not have the ability to see your entire file system. You need to mount them. So what is mounting them? Mounting them is essentially telling them or assigning them little nicknames in a sense. So you have this little colon in the middle. So the left of the colon is what the actual folder path is, and the right of the colon is how the app will refer to it. So in this case, my Volume 1 folder with my Docker folder with Plex. When Plex looks at it, or when we try and access it from within Plex, it's looking for config. And the same for media. So my Volume 1/media folder, Plex will refer to as data. So if you're in Plex and you say, get me the data folder, it's going to pull through the exact same folder. It's just, again, they're just nicknames for the folders. If you have a folder and it's not listed here, Plex will not be able to see it, or whatever app will not be able to see it. So any folders you plan on using, they need to be here. So it can still see subfolders. So obviously, when I create a movies and a TV folder shortly, as long as data's mounted, any subfolders will still be okay. And finally, we have restart unless stopped. So this basically means that in the event of a crash, the container will automatically restart unless we manually go in and stop it ourselves. So I tend to just use this as the default. There are a few different options, but it's best just to leave it as is. Just before we actually try and boot Plex, we're obviously going to need to set up some folders. So if I try and run this app, it will error. The reason it will error is because the Volume 1/Docker/Plex folder does not exist. So I need to create that. So we'll go to our files, go to shared folder. I'm going to go into my Docker folder, and we have media server. And then in here, I'm going to create a folder called Plex. It doesn't have to be a shared folder, just your bog standard folder. So as long as that folder is there, actually, you can see there's a mistake. So that is not the correct file path. It should be Volume 1/Docker/media server/Plex. So in that case, if you click into the address bar, it will give me the full path. So I can just copy that, and then I can just paste that in, make sure I've got the slash in there. And there we go. And also, that media folder is also incorrect because the media folder doesn't sit on Volume 1. It sits, as it just popped up there, it sits on Volume 2. So again, if I click into this, there we go. So I'm just going to replace that as well. There we are. So I'm going to create some folders. So I'm just going to create a TV folder. I'll create a movies folder. We'll just do those two for now. Obviously, as the series continues, we'll be looking at things like music and books and all sorts of lovely, wonderful stuff that you can host. So just before we try and deploy this app, just as our first app, obviously, we need to find out our PUID and our PGID. Now, how do you do this? Now, we're going to use something called SSH, which is Secure Shell. So don't worry if you don't know what it is, I will explain. It's basically a way to log in to the server via the command line. So if you're using a Ugreen NAS like myself, or a Synology, or a dedicated NAS server, you might have to enable SSH first. So in order to do that on the Ugreen NAS, we're going to go to Control Panel, we're going to go to Terminal, and we're just going to enable SSH there. You'll get this little warning, that's fine. So with the Ugreen NAS, you have this option to automatically shut down the SSH. So I'm just going to change it to an hour just whilst I'm recording. Obviously, you can set it to never. I wouldn't advise doing that unless you're 100% sure that your regular network security is fully secure. So I'm just going to set this to an hour, and then I'm going to apply that. There we go. So I'm going to load up a terminal. So you can just go to terminal on your Mac, your PC, Linux, whatever it might be. And then the command for this is SSH space. And then I need to provide my username for the NAS because I'm logging in as myself. So that's Alex at, and then I'm going to need to pop in that IP address, which in my case is 192.168.1.58. Obviously, make sure you pop in the IP address of your network device. I'm going to press enter. So it's going to give me a warning. Oh, so I've got this error here. So this is because I've factory reset my device, so the ID has changed. So in order to work around this, I'm going to do SSH-keygen -R and then the IP address. And that's going to basically update the hosts. So now if I just press my up key, so if you've never used command prompt or terminal before, if you just press up, you'll get your previous commands. Just saves you having to manually type everything over and over again. So then we're going to try again. There we go. So the first time you do it, it's basically going to say, whoa, 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 who's this who's trying to access your server? Do you want to allow it? So we're just going to type yes. And that's going to permanently add this device, which is given an ID here of ED25519, to a list of, basically it's a whitelist. If your name's not down, you're not coming in. In our case, our name's right there in the top, so we can get past the bouncer of the server. It's going to ask you for the password. So this will be the password you set when you first set up the Ugreen NAS. So I'm just going to type that in. There we go. So now you can see Alex at Maple Bacon, which is the name I've given my server, named after my gorgeous little cockapoo Maple. I'm just going to type ID. Now you can see here that my UID for Alex is 1000. The GID is 10 for admin. The groups is 10. 100 is users. So I don't want to use the admin group. I want to use the users group. So if we go back to our Docker, so I'm just going to change that to 100. You can use the admin group if you want, but again, for that extra security, I would advise against it. And you can see there, it's kind of, that's the current user, but I don't want to really use that. So now let's try and deploy it. So you're going to see it's going to download the app, and then it's going to set it all up for us. There we go. It's created the container. Sometimes you get a little pop-up message saying that it's been successful. So we'll click OK. And you can see that our media server project is now running. Obviously, it's only running one app. We've not set too much up on it yet. So this was just to give you a little idea of how to run an app. So it's not very automated, and there's also nothing on it. So we'll get to that shortly. So if we click into our media server, you can see these will be all the containers that we have. Obviously, we've only got Plex running, and you can see how much CPU it's using, how much RAM it's using. And then if we go over to resource monitoring, you get a little bit more. Obviously, when we start streaming from it, or it's going to be downloading artwork, you'll see these spike up. We can also go to our logs file, our logs tab, so this is going to be very, very helpful. So a lot of the time, if you try and run an app and you notice that it's errored or it's restarting, if you go to the logs tab, it will tell you what the issue is. So because we're in the media server project and I'm in the logs tab, it will tell you all the different apps. So it'll have Plex there, and if I've got all the other apps, it will basically give you a summary of all the container logs. However, if I click into Plex and go to log, it will only give me Plexes, which is obviously the same information, but it doesn't have Plex written at the side. So now one thing to note as well is because Plex runs on host mode, and this is unique to Plex for this tutorial, you'll see that it says there that the port is 3200. So that's how we're going to access Plex, is we're going to go to this IP address, :32400. So ports are how we're going to access the apps on our network. So you imagine that your device is a street, the port numbers are the different houses. So we need to make sure that we go to the right one. So just as an example, I'm going to create a new tab. I'm going to go to 192.168.1.58. I'm going to do a colon. I'm going to type in the default Plex port, which is 32400. There we go. Oh, so for Plex, it does this. So you have to add /web. Only Plex that does this. I don't know why. So now I am logged in to Plex. Obviously, I need to properly set it up. So we'll come back to this once we've set up some of our other apps, because there's no point really doing it now. So back to our project. Obviously, we're going to need to add our other apps. Now, we could do individual projects for each app or individual containers for each app, but that's just going to get messy. It's going to be a bit of a pain to manage. So the easiest thing to do is we can just add to our current stack. So in order to do this, we're going to go to Media Server, we're going to go to our Compose configuration, and we're going to stop the container for now. So this will close the app. So once it's closed and it's not running, if I try and go back to Plex, it's just going to error because obviously Plex is no longer there. Now, I already have a Compose configuration for this. So all of the configurations I'll link on my GitHub. So you can just copy and paste them if you like. However, I would advise set them up yourself because you'll understand how Docker works. So in order to add more to our stack, we can just make a couple of new lines. So you can have as many lines as you want between apps, but obviously that's probably not the wise idea because it looks a little bit messy. You can also, if you use the hash key, you can do what's called a comment. So anything I write in here will just be ignored. So I'm not going to get any errors. So this could be quite handy if you want to keep your stack nice and tidy. For example, I can go, so that's entirely up to you. It can keep things nice and tidy. So for our media downloader, I'm going to be using an app called SABnzbd. And what this is, if you watched my first video, then we're going to be using Usenet to acquire all our media. So go back and watch that video. It'll be linked below because you're going to need a Usenet server and some indexes. So I went more in depth into that on my previous video. So assuming you've got all that, I will get my configuration. So I've just pasted in my version of the SAB compose file. And if you're wondering, well, how did he know what the link was or where to get all the information, then I will just quickly show you. So if you go over to hub.docker.com, this is basically a library of the Docker images. If I go up to this search bar at the top and I search for SABnzbd, I can see there that one with 500 million downloads. I'm going to assume that's the one we need. So I'm just going to click into this one. And this is basically how Docker works. So we're telling it, get this app, and then apply the necessary variables. So if we scroll down, so like I mentioned earlier, we've got those tags. So if you want the unstable build or the nightly build, which I don't recommend, or just the latest one. And then you can come down and you can see this Docker compose file. And then all you need to do is just copy this. You don't need the services bit at the top because we've already got that. That only needs to appear once in the file. So anything from the name of the app down. So you can copy that and then just paste it straight into your compose file. So again, just to reiterate, we have the name of the app, we have the image link that it's going to download with that latest tag, unless you really want the unstable one, which I would recommend, the name of the container. Now this one has the ports as part of it. The reason for that being is because Plex is on a different network mode, it will use just the default 32400 port, which is very important for Plex because it's for media streaming. For SABnzbd and for other apps, it will have a default port usually given by the app, but we can also we could use whichever one we wanted personally, but I'm just going to stick with the defaults just because they're the ones I know. So we have our environment variables again. So I've got my ID, which I know is 1000. I've got my group ID, which I'm going to bump to 100. And then we need to set our volumes. So I'm just going to, again, add that /media server. And then our volume1 /downloads, that's going to be where it puts our downloads. And that's why I created this additional downloads folder. Obviously, you don't have to. You can create your downloads folder wherever you want. And then as long as you've mounted it properly, it will be able to find it. Now, what's going to happen here is I'm going to enable this and it's not going to work. Any guesses why? Time's up. I'm going to click redeploy and this will download. We'll tick pull the latest image and this is going to download. Oh, it's errored. Why has it errored? Now, luckily, it's told me that there's an issue on line 29. Now, I'm trying to mount a folder that doesn't exist. So if I go to my files, and I go back to my shared folder, and I go to Docker, media server, oh, I've got Plex, but I've not got a folder for SAB. So whilst I'm here, I'm going to make folders for all the apps that we're going to be covering, just to save a little bit of time later. This file here is just this text file. So that's why I kept it in a media server. So as you become more confident with Docker and you start having all your different projects, it will have the little Docker Compose YAML file in there as well. So don't rename that. It needs to be called that, otherwise it won't find it. So now, if I try and redeploy, there we go. It's working because it can mount the folder successfully. No issues there. So just to not bore you to death, what I'm going to do is, firstly, I'm also going to add Jellyfin, because I know that Jellyfin is becoming more and more popular. Not one I use perfectly, and I'll cover that in later videos why I prefer Plex, but I'll be sure to cover the setups of both in this tutorial. So just to keep things moving swiftly along, I'm going to quickly show you probably the easiest way to set up some apps. So there we are. I've just quickly put together my Radarr and Sonarr. So you can just copy this if you like. Like I said, it will be on my GitHub and linked in the description. But again, it's always a good idea to understand. So I need to fix that volume because volume 2 is my media. But what I've done here is, rather than mount the whole media folder as /data, I've just mounted the movies folder. And I'm actually going to change that from /data to /movies. Because you can call, for the most part, when you're mounting a drive, you can call it whatever you like. It's just so when you try and access it, it's easier to remember. And the same thing for Sonarr. I've just given it the TV subfolder. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to change that to /TV just so it's quicker. I've also made sure I've mounted the downloads folder, because obviously what's going to happen is SABnzbd is going to download to the downloads folder. In order for Radarr or Sonarr to access it, it needs to also be able to see that folder, or else you're going to get some nasty little warnings when we come to set these apps up later. So now that's all done, I'm going to stop the container first just so we can deploy them all at once. There we go. So it's pulling all the necessary images, it's downloading them, and then it's going to create the containers, and then we should hopefully get a little pop-up message. There we go. So we got the little pop-up saying it's been successfully enabled. And then if we go to the logs tab, you'll see all the different apps are all doing their initial startup checks and all that good stuff. Or if you wanted to click into the media server project, you can see we've now got our 5 containers working away, and you can see which ones are the memory hogs, which ones are the CPU hogs. For the most part, these are quite lightweight. And again, we can see our unified logs there where it tells us app by app. Or if you wanted to see a specific app, for example, if one of the apps had failed to start for an issue, it would have an error. You could click into it and then go to the log, and then it would usually, hopefully, tell you what the issue is. So this is basically it for now for the Docker setup. I'm sure a lot of you breathed a sigh of relief at that point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through, starting with SABnzbd. We're going to go through and set up these apps so we can download our media and have it handled by the relevant app and then placed onto the servers where we can stream them on our local network. Okie dokie. So what I'm going to do is, just to give things a nice little bit of a journey, I'm going to pop in our IP address. And firstly, I'm going to do SAB, which the port, if you remember, is 8080. So that's our SAB wizard. And then I'm just going to make a few more tabs just so we can follow along nice and easily. So you can just copy that first part, tap colon, and then the next one will be, is it 7878? Oh, yes. I think it's 8989 for Sonarr. And then for Plex, obviously we know it's 32400/web. For some reason, Plex, you have to do the /web, or it gives you that weird XML stuff. So we're going to go through and we're going to set up one by one each app. So starting with SABnzbd. So this is SABnzbd. This will be what downloads our media from Usenet. So it does have this little wizard here, so you can just start that. So If you saw my previous video where I covered some prerequisite stuff, you're going to need your server details for your Usenet server. So in my case, the link is news.usenetserver.com. And then I'm going to pop in my username and password, no peeking. And I'm going to test the server. And I think I typed my password in wrong. And then I'm going to test the server. There we go, connection successful. You can also click these advanced settings, and depending on how many connections your server had, you can just set the number. I believe mine's 55. You can always do this later if you wish, and then you can just give it another test. So next. So you can right-click these links and bookmark them. So one thing I want to do before I click go is, obviously, we set up a specific downloads folder, which isn't the default one, because normally, if I go back to my server, what SAB will do is it will create a downloads folder in here. You can see it there, and in there it will have complete and incomplete, which means that in order for the other apps to see it, you have to give it access to the SAB folder, and it gets a little bit messy. So I don't like it. So instead, I'm going to click this little cog here, and I'm going to go to Browse. I'm just going to go back a little bit, and then you can see that I have this downloads folder. Now this /downloads is the downloads folder that we made earlier. It is this one. And just to prove that theory, if I make a folder and I call it hello, I go back, then go back in, hello, there it is. So that's how you know you've got the right folder. So for temporary, we will make a incomplete folder and then a completed folder. And then I'll remove the hello folder because I'm not going to put anything in there ever. So we'll just go back. So for temporary download folder, incomplete, accept, and then we'll do the same for the completed download folder. So make sure you go all the way back to the root downloads and completed, and then we'll accept that. So just to reiterate as well, so the reason we mount folders, obviously I've called this folder /downloads. If I called it /monkey, you would see a folder called monkey on here. Don't ask me why I said monkey. It was the first thing that came to my mind. Neanderthal brain. So I'll just cancel out of that for now. Okay, so obviously make sure you save the changes. So I'm going to enable advanced settings just because it gives us a little bit more options to choose from. So I'm going to go to, obviously, my servers. Yep, my servers there. Obviously, you have more than one. You can just add them here. I know some people have multiple. I do have a secondary one, but I'm not going to be setting that up right this moment. I'll do that in my own time. Now, categories. The default categories will be fine for now. We need to make sure we at least have a movies and TV one. This is just so that when these apps, Radarr and Sonarr, connect, they use these categories as a way to identify which files are there. Otherwise, you'd get Radarr going, I've got this TV show, I have no idea what it is. We have switches. So this is just some little options here. Most of these you don't really need to worry too much about. If you've got quite a beefy computer, then make sure you enable direct unpack and then save those changes. What this is going to do is, as it says there, it's going to start unpacking the job as it downloads, and it just saves a little bit of time. For sorting, you don't need to worry about sorting because that's what Radarr and Sonarr are going to handle. Notifications, you can have a look at this in your own time if you like. I don't bother with it. Scheduling as well, if you want to only have it download between certain hours of the day, you can play around with schedules. There's an RSS feed, haven't really looked too much at this sort of stuff. And then there's some special options here. Most of these, or all of these, you don't really need to touch. Like it says there, they're rarely used, so don't worry too much about them. So now let's click the SAB tab. And then obviously warnings. So I failed login because I entered my password in wrong, so I can just exit those warnings. And then inside SAB, you've got a few different options. So you can click this status and interface options, and you can do some test downloads if you like, or you can double check the active connections. You can fix the web interface. For example, if you want the queue to show more than 20 amps per page, I'm just going to whack it right up to the max. You can use a full screen layout. You can use a tabbed layout. All that is entirely up to you. You can confirm deletions if you like. I don't really tend to bother. And this is basically it for SAB. Now let's move on to actually getting some media. Okay, so first up, Radarr. So we're on our second of our 5 tabs. So anytime you set up Radarr or Sonarr, you're going to get this little authentication window pop up. So we're just going to set this up. So we're going to use the forms login page. Obviously, it's the only one. You can have this enabled, so whenever you access this, it will ask you to log in, or you can do disabled for local addresses. So if you're just in your home, on your home network, and you log in, it will not ask you for the username and password. But if you're like me, that is fine. So for username and password, obviously make sure it's something memorable, then we'll hit save. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our system, and you'll see we've got this really ugly 3. So it's saying we've got no indexes with RSS sync enabled, so it won't be able to grab any new downloads. We haven't got a download client, and we've not got any indexes with automatic search enabled. Obviously, the reason for that being is we've not yet configured any of those things. So the first thing we're going to do is go to settings, and we're going to configure our download client. So that is going to be SAB. So I'm going to click the plus button. And then you'll see if you're using Usenet and you're using something other than SAB, there's some options here. If you're using torrents, I won't be covering torrents because I find them a bit more inconsistent. But if you are doing, then you can access those profiles there. But I'm just going to use the SAB profile. So now we need to just fill this out. So for some reason, the way Docker works is if you have it on localhost, which would normally be okay, it will throw a bit of a fit. So the best way to handle this is just to pop that IP address in again, just so it knows exactly where it's going. Now we're also going to need an API key. So these are basically passwords that will allow Radarr to access SAB to send the downloads to. And it basically goes, have you got your passkey? Right, you have. Okay, cool. You can also in SAB add a username and password if you want a little bit of added security. I'm not going to do that. Category. So obviously we need to have the movies category, or if you've created a category called something else, then make sure it's pointed at a category like it says there. It just means that it's not going to try and grab downloads that aren't meant for that particular app. The priorities, you can just leave those as the defaults. Tags, you don't really need to mess with at this point. And then make sure you have completed download handling. So what it'll do is it will keep the queue nice and tidy. So we need to get our API key. So if we go back over to SAB and we go to our settings cog and then we click general, we have our general settings. So here is where you can set a username and password. And here, this little box here is our API key. So we'll double click that. We'll copy it. We'll go back to Radarr and we'll just paste it in there. And then all we need to do is hit test and we should get that nice green tick. If you don't get a green tick and you get an error, if you scroll back up, it will tell you what the error was. Then hit save. So that is our download client. So if I go back to system, it should only have 2. There we go. You can see the number has now changed. So we just need to set up our indexes. Now, I did also mention in my previous video, again, please check that out if you haven't already, about indexes. I can't specifically link to indexes, obviously because of the nature of what we're covering today. However, if you go to the Usenet subreddit, you will find all the information you need to know about indexes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click indexes. I'll demonstrate basically how they work, and then I'm going to just fill mine out. So we'll click plus, and then again, if you're using torrents, you can just click whichever torrents or set up a custom feed, however you want to do that. For NewsNab, which is the basically Newsnet, you click this presets, there's some popular ones here, or if you've got ones that aren't on here, you can click custom. Usually the indexes will give you the proper links and whatever information you need to access them. These They're just the presets. So for example, if I click DogNZB, you'll see that it's already pre-populated the URL where it's going to search, but you don't need to worry too much about it. You'll also need from your indexer an API key. So usually when you sign up to an indexer, usually you get a free API key that will say, oh, you can use this API key 100 times today. But once that limit's hit, it will lock. Some of them you can pay a few dollars for or a few quid for, and you'll get thousands of API key hits per day. So always worth paying a little bit of money just to prevent any future headaches. So I'm going to go through and add my indexers, and I'll see you shortly. Okay, so I've added my indexers, and you can see when I go to System, I don't have any errors. So what we're going to do now is in our settings, we're going to go to Media Management, because basically we want Radarr to keep our movies nice and organized. So I'm going to tick Show Advanced. I'm going to hit Rename Movies, and then here is where you can set the parameters to rename movies. So I like keeping things neat and getting rid of that little quality tab there. If you click this little question mark, it will give you a list of all the tags that you can add. So you can just use this box at the bottom. If you wanted the IMDb ID, you could just click and it'll add it there for you. I don't. I'm just going to stick with the movie title and the release year, and then we'll close that. You can unmonitor deleted movies. So if you download a movie and you watch it and you go, that was terrible, I never want to see it again, and you delete it, Radarr will unmonitor it and it will stop searching for it. However, if you don't have this ticked, if you delete a movie, it will go, oh, he mustn't have watched it, I'll download it again for him. And it creates a little bit of a vicious cycle. So most importantly at the bottom as well, we're going to add our root folder. So this is basically our movies folder. So I'm going to click Add Root Folder. And then I should have a folder called Movies. So obviously originally it was called Data, but I renamed it just so it's much easier to see that Movies folder. So we'll click OK. Obviously there's nothing in there yet. So now if I go back to my media management, I can see that that Movies folder is there. Next up, we have Profiles. Now this is where I won't go too into depth, but for a basic overview, if I click into this first profile here, this Any, basically any media that's ticked here, it will include when it's searching. So I never want work prints, I never want cams or telesyncs, so I'm just going to untick some of these. Don't want DVD-Rs, I don't want Blu-ray discs or these 4K remuxes, not yet. So I'm just going to stick with that for now as a rough guide. You also have this option here where upgrades will be allowed. If I tick that, you can see it'll default to one of them. So in this case, Blu-ray 480p. So what this means is if I download a movie and it's a DVD, it will keep searching. And if it finds a Blu-ray 480p copy, it will automatically upgrade it and replace it. And you can set this to, say, 1080p. So if you get a lower quality movie like a 720p, it will keep upgrading until it finds 1080p. Obviously, if it finds 1080p first, it will just stop upgrading it. And then also you have your language. So I like keeping this on original. Obviously, you don't want to get dubs in languages you don't speak. Some people set this just to English. However, I prefer just to set it to original. And then we'll hit save. So what this will do is when we add a movie, it will say, right, what quality profile do you want to use? You can use any or HD, or you can even create your own profile if you want a little bit more control. Like I said, I'll be covering this in greater detail in a future video. So just have a play around and tweak it. On top of profiles, we also have quality. So if you want it to download a 1080p movie, but you don't want it to have the absolute highest bitrate and take up tons and tons of space on your hard drives, particularly if you've only got limited hard drive space, you can use these sliders, and you've got these two figures here. You've got this green one, which is your preferred, so it will look for file sizes around 12.4 gig an hour in this case. You've also got this orange figure. This is a strict cutoff. If it finds the movie, but the file size is too big, it just will not download it unless you allow it. So you could set all these to unlimited if you want, if you've got absolutely tons of space. So I'm going to leave these I'll just reset them to default for now because I like tweaking with these a little bit more. But again, have a play around. I won't be covering that for this video. We also have import lists, which is very, very cool. So one thing you can do, we'll cover automation in general, but for example, if you set up a Plex watch list, and if you're in the Plex app and you search for a movie and press watch, it will automatically send it to Radarr, which obviously if the movie's been released, it will search, it will scan, it will download it, and then it will pop it into Plex ready for you. And the same for IMDb lists, or there's some custom lists here. If you use apps like Tracked and Letterboxd, I know there's some third-party solutions that allow you to do that as well. You also have things like these presets. So if you wanted to download IMDb's top 250, you could click that, you could add it, and then it will automatically start downloading all of IMDb's top 250, which I wouldn't advise at this stage. We'll do some testing shortly. So that's basically it for Radarr for now. So you can pause the video and have a crack at setting up Sonarr yourself. I'll give you a little hint. The setup process is 99% identical. So if you're feeling confident, do give that a shot. If not, don't worry, because I'm going to go through it now. And here we are. Here is Sonarr. So again, we're going to set our authentication method. For some reason, Sonarr has this additional browser pop-up, which I think is rubbish. So I'm going to stick with the forms page. So again, we've got the same errors that we started with. So download clients, add, SAB, host, whichever device your host is on, the port, the API key, and then the category TV, and then test and save. There we go. Next up, indexes. So obviously, we're going to have to do all these again. Now, in a later video, I'll be covering an app called Prowler, which basically connects two apps like Radarr and Sonarr, and you basically manage them from a higher level. So it will automatically add the indexes for you, so you don't have to keep doing it manually. Or if you get a new indexer, you don't have to go through, add it to one, then add it to the other. You can just add it to a single place, aka Prowler, and it will automatically drop down into the necessary apps for you. So again, I'm going to go through and quickly populate my indexes. Okay, there we are, indexes populated. Now onto our media management. So we want to rename the episodes, and then make sure you set your parameters. So I don't like having the series title as part of the name because it's already in the series folder. And then I don't like having quality on the end, but as with Radarr, there's a little question mark and you can use whatever you like. Got to make sure on monitor deleted episodes is ticked. You can enable show advanced. Anything that's orange is an advanced folder. So I want to make sure I delete the empty folders. And then just for neatness, I'll hide the advanced. I'm going to add my root folder, which will be called /TV, or just TV. There we go, it's there. We'll save those changes. Profiles, I'm going to go to my any profile. I'm going to actually probably keep all these, actually. Yeah, they're fine. I'll allow upgrades, upgrade until Web 1080. There's no language option for this for some reason, but like I said, it's 99% the same. Getting quality, I'll leave this as is for now, but I'll probably have a play around later. Okay, and there we are. That is it for Sonarr. So now we have our flow where we can add a movie or a series. It will download it, but what's it going to do once it's downloaded it and renamed it? Obviously, we're going to need to set up our media server. So I use Plex, as I've mentioned, but I will also cover Jellyfin because it's a little bit simpler. It's probably better for the majority of you, but I will go through both. So let's start with Plex. Okay, so here is Plex. So I have got, that's my original server, and then this is the new one. So usually when you log into Plex, you'll get a little bit of a setup wizard. So if you skip that like I have, you can come to your server and you press this little plus button. And then we're going to add our libraries. So we'll start with films. I prefer to call them movies, even though I am English, so I should really call them films, not moves. Movies. I'm going to browse for our media folder, which is in our data folder. Movies. There we go. And then in advanced, so the scanner and the agent are basically how it's going to match the metadata. You can just leave this on Plex Movie. I found that it does the job pretty well. You can include the home screen and global search, which is what I want to do. Certification country, I'll leave it on US actually. You can use original titles. Obviously, some films have different titles in different countries. You can prefer the artwork based on the library language. You can use local assets. If you download a film that already has the artwork as part of the download, it will use that. So I have a Plex Pass, which is a monthly subscription, which allows you to stream remotely to your friends outside your network, and you also get some cool little add-ons as well. We'll allow red band trailers, we'll allow localized subtitles. If you're someone who wants to host the adult entertainment, then you can allow matching to explicit content. I don't, because my partner's family use this server and they have children, so I'd probably get in a lot of trouble. You have this minimum automatic collection size, so basically if you've got movies from the same series, rather than have 3 separate entries for, say, the Rush Hours, right, that came to my head, you can set it so if you've got 2 of the movies, it'll create a collection, or if you've got 3, it'll create a collection, whatever the minimum number is. I set this on 3. Rating source, you can have Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, or the movie database. I just like to leave it on Rotten Tomatoes. Video preview thumbnails, I disable these because they can eat up quite a bit of space on your hard drive. For collections, I hide items which are in collections, because otherwise, like I mentioned a moment ago, you'd have the Rush Hour collection, and then Rush Hour 1, Rush Hour 2, Rush Hour 3. Whereas it's better just to have the Rush Hour collection, and you click into that, and then you have 1, 2, and 3. Credits detection, I think this is a Plex Pass feature. Ad detection, I don't record live TV, which is a feature you can do in Plex. And then voice activity detection for auto-synchronizing subtitles. I'm going to add that library. Now, normally it's scan, but obviously I haven't got anything yet. But we'll set these libraries up now so you can see the magic happen. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my TV shows or TV programs, if you're from The Sopranos. Again, exact same thing, data/TV, add, and then Plex series again, episode sorting, oldest first. Episode ordering, this can be a little bit finicky. I like using the TVDB. It's more geared towards television. So I've found that because of the way certain TV shows can be in broadcast order, different from DVD release order, sometimes you can get a little bit of mismatch in which you do have to manage it manually, unfortunately. So I prefer to use the TVDB. I like using season titles when available. And then I think most of these will allow red band. We'll keep the porn off. Untick video previews. You don't tend to get shows in collections, but I'll hide them anyway. So you can choose to show seasons. I like hiding them for a single season series just because it saves on a click. You can enable intro and credits detection. And then voice activity, we'll add that as well. So now we have our library set up. Okay, so here we are. So what's going to happen? I'm going to add a movie. It's going to scan for that movie. It's going to find it, hopefully, and then it will send it over to SAB, which will download it. Once it's downloaded, it will send it back to Radarr for processing, renaming, that kind of thing. Once Radar's done all that good stuff, it's going to send a little ping to Plex. Plex is going to scan it, get the metadata, and we should see that movie pop up here. So let's start with a classic. We'll go for Night of the Living Dead. So there we go, the 1968 version. We're going to click that. So this is where you can set your quality profile. So we'll just leave it on any, and then we'll click add. So you can see it's processing it, it's searching, it's already found it. It's got an 18 gig version. So this is where you'd probably want to have a little bit of a play around with the quality settings so you don't end up eating through your hard drive space. So yeah, get a little warning there that I've enabled direct unpack, which is absolutely fine. It just means that it's going to start unpacking as it does. So you can see this little figure here, this 9 out of 34. It's downloading 34 different blocks. It's going to combine them all, do all the unpacking, but it's doing that as it downloads, just to save a little bit of time. So also if we go to our activity window here, you can see what's going on from Radarr's perspective. Okay, there we are. So it's downloaded. It's gone back to Radarr. Radarr will be processing it. And then once it's processed, it will be shifting it over to my hard drive, which will obviously, because it's a 17 gig movie, will take a moment. So there we can see it's gone purple, so it's waiting to import. So we can see Plex is scanning, and then it should. And there we go. So we've been able to get a movie very, very quickly. And if we just press play, it's the Criterion Collection version. How lovely. And we have George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, an absolute horror classic. And finally, just before we wrap things up, I will cover Jellyfin. So this isn't an app I use a lot, but it is quite popular. So we'll connect that. I'll give my server a slightly catchy name. We'll just call it Jellyfin. And then we'll set an admin account name. So I'll just do username and password. So we're going to add our media library. Very, very similar to what we did for Plex. So we're going to select movies. We're going to add our folder. So obviously it's data/movies. Okay, so you can see in there, because I've downloaded a movie, there is another folder in there. Obviously, don't select the individual movie folder. We're going to enable the library. Preferred language is English. Country region isn't UK. We'll prefer the, I'll leave that unticked. Most of this is all down to personal preference. So a lot of these is to do with metadata fetching and things like that. We'll click OK. And there we are. So if I click on my movies library, so I'll do the same thing again for, I like calling it TV shows. I don't know why it says shows. We'll add our data/TV folder. Obviously, there's nothing in there yet. We'll click OK. And there we are. And then if we hit next, do some metadata stuff. We'll allow remote connections, and then we'll finish. And then it'll kick us out. We'll log back in with the username that we just set. And then we should see. And there we go. With a slightly different poster that it's grabbed that time, which I do quite like the look of. So yeah, Jellyfin, very, very simple. I'll be going more in depth into the differences between Jellyfin and Plex and why I much prefer Plex in the coming weeks. And there we are. We now have ourselves a media server, which is mostly automated. We will be looking at some further automations in the coming weeks. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned, as every Sunday I'll be exploring the wonderful world of self-hosting. So if this video helped you out, I would appreciate a like. As I said a moment ago, please subscribe. Make sure you enable notifications so you never miss a video. And if you've got any comments, questions, feedback, anything you want to know, please pop a comment below. I will see you next time.